to the cloud. All right, so welcome to our virtual discussion. I'm joined today by staff of the Office of Diversity and Inclusion Tutoring Program. Zaid, would you like to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. So hello everyone, my name is Zaid Abukar. I'm the program manager for Tutoring and Study Skill Services in the Office of Diversity and Inclusion at The Ohio State University. Essentially, I oversee a staff of over 20 tutors, supplemental instruction leaders, work study students, and a graduate associate who will be introducing himself shortly. And our job is to provide academic services to students who are affiliated with the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. And so most of these students are going to be students who come from underrepresented backgrounds, single parent students, students of color who are in STEM majors, low-income students, first-generation students, and more.
And Graham, would you like to introduce yourself?
Of course. I am Graham Knight. I am a fourth-year PhD candidate in the Higher Education and Student Affairs program here at Ohio State. I have been the Graduate Administrative Associate for the tutoring program my entire tenure here at Ohio State. And although my title is Graduate Administrative Associate for the tutoring program, my functional role is as the coordinator for the supplemental instruction program here.
And thank you. And so today we're going to be discussing how we maintain academic support through COVID-19 for students. My name is Shayla Thomas, and I serve as the Executive Director for the Young Scholars Program. I will be moderating today's discussion. I'm going to share my screen, Zaid, because I'd like for you to talk a little bit about the tutoring program and before we get into our discussion.
Absolutely, there we go. So as I mentioned, I'm the program manager for Tutoring and Study Skill Services within the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. I'm going to tell you just a little bit about it so you can get a sense for what it is that we do and who we serve.
Does that not work? I'll go. There we go.
There we go. So the big picture vision of what we do is to empower students to achieve personal and academic success, growth, and excellence. Our mission is to encourage personal and academic development through a collaborative approach, which helps to develop the inclusive leaders of tomorrow. And we do this by providing academic services and learning environments to facilitate successful transitions into the campus community for ODI scholars. So next, we're going to talk a little bit about the specific goals that we have as a program and then the services that we provide. So one of our main goals is to provide personalized academic support services. As you all know, OSU is a huge university, and as much as we do to try to make it feel like a smaller community, it can be overwhelming for students. And so one of the most important things to us as a program is that we are giving our students and our student populations individualized support as much as possible. Next, we hope to help students identify and address areas of academic concern. We really strive to reduce those gaps in academic knowledge that a student might be coming to us with. Also, we want to generate awareness of tools and resources to overcome any perceived obstacles to academic success, whether those tools and resources are the ones that we provide or whether it's resources outside of our unit and across campus. Our goal is to make sure that our students know what they have at their disposal. We want to introduce and reinforce effective learning strategies. So it's not just fishing for someone, but also teaching them how to fish and giving them strategies that they can employ during their own free time. And then last but not least, another one of our goals is to offer rewarding and flexible employment opportunities for high achieving students. As much as we strive to assist the students in ODI Scholars programs, a big part of what we do is to assist our student staff and to give them development opportunities and to help them with their growth and leadership learning as well. So as far as the specific services that we provide, these are the three main services. So first is one-on-one and small group tutoring. We are one of, I believe, 2 or 3 tutoring units on all of campus that provides one-on-one tutoring. We also provide some small group tutoring, so a ratio of 3 to 1 or 2 to 1, particularly if a student comes to us or if students come to us with that need. We also provide supplemental instruction, which Graham oversees, and he'll be talking more about throughout the course of this webinar. Supplemental instruction basically is a model that has weekly structured study sessions where students engage in collaborative learning, and they are led by a supplemental instruction leader who is a student who has taken the course and is very knowledgeable in that subject. And then last but not least, we provide study and review materials for students. So one of the most regularly used resources that we provide is our test bank. And we have currently, I think, over 115 different subjects that students can, or over 115 materials that students can request so that they can learn and prepare and study for their exams. All right, and last but not least, like I said earlier, we serve students who are affiliated in ODI Scholars Programs. And what you see listed here are the programs. So that is Access Collaborative, the Bell National Resource Center, the Dr. James Elmore Scholars Program, Latinx Student Services, LSAMP Scholars, Moral Scholars, and of course the Young Scholars Program. All combined, that is, I believe, over 3,000 undergraduate students across all of those programs. So hopefully now you have a little bit of a sense for what it is that we do and the scope of the work that we do.
Thanks for that overview, Zaid. I think that did a great job in just grounding some of our conversation for today. What I like to do is just put a disclaimer out in that we're asking you, or I'm going to be asking you questions that discusses your experience as you are responding to the nation's crisis with coronavirus, COVID-19. And so while I don't think that any of us are experts in coronavirus, I think that what this pandemic has done is given us a great opportunity to think about how we lead our team and our staff, but then also how we service students. And so, and how have you responded as tutoring program manager and as the graduate assistant for supplemental instruction, how you've responded in making sure that you can provide academic enrichment services, continued academic enrichment services to our students. And so, Zaid, I'm going to begin with a question to you. Zaid, as a tutoring program manager, what were your initial thoughts on continuing to offer tutoring services during the national crisis?
Yeah, Dr. Thomas. So my first thought was, well, things are not going to be the same because a lot of what we do is in person, whether it's one-on-one tutoring or it's supplemental instruction with small groups of students collaborating together. All of that is done in person. And so immediately I knew that things weren't going to be the same, but then I had to start thinking about fundamentally, what is the most important aspect of what we do? And when it really comes down to it, what we do is we connect students who need academic assistance with students who are knowledgeable in that subject matter. And we facilitate those connections, right? And then after that, I said, okay, well, that's what we do, right? That is the very nature of what we do. Now, what are the tools that we have at our disposal, right? So we have Carmen, we have Zoom, we have Skype, we have Buckeye Box. What are the different technological tools that we can use to maybe facilitate the nature of what it is that we do? And then based on that, I really just kind of brainstormed different possibilities of ways that we can still make those connections happen between students. I eventually came up with a plan. I shared that plan with leadership. It was approved. And then immediately I communicated that plan to our staff. And then last but not least, after our staff knew, okay, this is what our new roles are going to be looking like in this new coronavirus age, the most important piece actually, which was our last piece, was to communicate this information to ODI scholars. I sent an email to all ODI scholars. Dr. Moore, our Vice Provost for Diversity and Inclusion, sent an email to all the ODI scholars. And then we also had our tutors and supplemental instruction leaders reach out to their students that they've been regularly working with to let them know, hey, we're still here and we're still working for you. So essentially, I thought through my options, I came up with a plan, and I communicated it. I knew kind of in the back of my mind that, you know, things could change as time went on, but I was most concerned with making sure that students knew that they still had support and that our staff knew what they needed to do as well. The last thing that you need, you know, during a crisis like this is for there to be a lack of clarity. And so my priority, my initial thought was to provide clarity as soon as possible and then communicate throughout.
Thank you. So Graham, supplemental instruction is based on group work. How did that impact your adjustment to virtual support services?
Yeah, and that's a great question. I think what I want to emphasize throughout this discussion is the distinction between what we did in terms of our immediate response and then what we intend to do as this disruption is ongoing. And in response to the question at hand, in the spring semester, we made no attempt to transpose the SI group work or collaborative work model onto a virtual setting because we did not, at least in SI, have that infrastructure in place at the time. As Zaid alluded to earlier, we did have a number of things in place, and when it boiled down to it, we had to think of what, at the end of the day, is it that we are providing in its academic support. And so what we did have in place were SI leaders who were competent, capable, and most importantly, trusted by their students. And those SI leaders continued to engage with the material that their instructors or professors provided, and who themselves, the SI leaders, created videos and worksheets to put the material into terms that students could perhaps better grapple with than however the instructors were conveying that material. Looking forward into autumn, we will have the infrastructure in place to go either completely virtual or have a hybrid model that we can then begin working the SI collaborative ethos into.
And then Zay, tutoring is traditionally implemented in person. Which factors for offering tutoring services did you prioritize to continue offering tutoring through the end of the academic year, or are you planning for next year?
Yeah, so I think in the midst of when the pandemic first came along, one of the things that I prioritized the most was supporting our tutoring staff in particular. So we decided that SI staff would be developing video recordings and study guides. And so because they're experts at what they do, the support for them was going to look different than the support for tutoring students who were going to be conducting Zoom meetings. So my priority was to support my staff and to not only tell them what they need to do, but how they need to do it. And so what I did was I researched best practices for providing online tutoring, and I created a simple sheet, 1 or 2 pages, about 2 pages, and provided it to tutoring staff so that in the midst of helping students over Zoom, they were still being effective peer educators. It was also important to support them, not just because of the work they do with students, but also because they are students themselves. So I made it a point to meet with them one-on-one, Zoom meetings, just kind of checking in, like, how are you doing? How's your family? You know, how has this impacted your course load and your classes? And obviously we talked about how have their tutoring appointments been going as well. But my priority was supporting the staff at first because they were the ones who, or they are the ones who are on the front line, who are helping students, who are seeing things firsthand. And so that was number one. And then I would say number two was to support as many students as possible who needed help, whether it was the students who regularly attended supplemental instruction, and Graham was working with his team to make sure that they were getting support, or whether it was the students who are accustomed to getting weekly tutoring. Our next priority was to make sure that anyone who came to us for help was to help them, and if we couldn't, to connect them to something on campus that could.
And then you mentioned it a little bit, but can you talk a little further about students' social, emotional, and psychological response to online learning?
Absolutely. So, like I said, I talked to our tutors just to kind of check in on them and sort of gauge what it is that they've been seeing. Apparently, you know, a lot of our students, well, obviously we're kind of going through a difficult time with the pandemic, emotionally, and just kind of keeping their focus. I also want to note that Graham and I sent out a survey to all of the students who used services during the pandemic, just to get a sense for what it is that worked, what it is that didn't work. And even though the vast majority of them were thankful that they had online services or that they had other resources that they could refer to, most of them indicated that they preferred in-person assistance. And so it just remains that, you know, what we did was a fix, but it wasn't necessarily the ideal. And so something that we hope to do moving forward, hopefully, you know, is to continue to offer online services and continue to offer supplemental instruction, but to maybe check in more with students and just kind of ask them, how can we support them, or how can we make this a better experience for them?
Yeah, and that leads me into my next question, and understanding how the role of the mentor and the tutors changed during the quarantine, and how have students' academics needs changed?
Yeah, so it's funny. So the mission never really changed, right? So like the very spirit of what we do, which is to connect students to help, right? That part has never changed. I think what changed was the tactics. So how we go about executing that mission is what changed. So tutoring using Zoom looks very different than tutoring with someone who's face-to-face with you, you know, where you can share a notebook and they can write something and then you can write something. You can read someone's body language a little bit better. You can tell if they're, you know, if they really understand or if they're just saying that they understand. A lot of those things are lost, right? And so the tactics look different. And to the point of supplemental instruction as well, how we go about fostering a collaborative learning space is going to look different. As far as students' needs and how they change, again, the very spirit of what students need from us did not change. So a student still wants to know what the difference is between an acid and a base. A student still wants to know how to find the derivative, you know, or how to find the function, or whatever it is that they may need help with. But I think what really changed during this time was less so the specific academic questions that they had, and maybe some of the other circumstances that they were dealing with that they didn't deal with before. So for instance, students having internet connection issues and that being an impediment to receiving tutoring, or students planning to drop from a class, and because of that, they don't really need tutoring anymore. Students having to adapt to a new style of learning, and because of that, now they need tutoring when they never needed tutoring in the past. I think the real change as far as students' academic needs, again, was less their academic needs and more changes to all of the other things that impact their academics.
And Graham, for you, how did you balance the needs of the tutors or the SI instructors with the needs of your students?
I think what we recognized first, and I think Zaid alluded to this, was that our tutors and SI leaders were experiencing many of the same things that their students were, and that we had to adjust our expectations accordingly. We knew that our staff couldn't be expected to pour from an empty glass. In my opinion, we, by which I mean really Zaid, as he crafted the shift to the virtual services, really did a great job balancing maintaining employment for our tutors, modulating the expectations for what they were to provide for their students, while still giving our ODI scholars the help that they needed as well. And when it comes to moving forward, we will have the time and the space and the energy to think more intentionally about the ways that we will need to begin fostering the collaboration and meeting those students' psychological and social needs that are in a lot of ways the prerequisite to what they need to be met before their academic needs can be met. You know, we always try to place our students first and see them as whole individuals. We'll get to the content later, but we need to check in on our students first and make sure that they are as well as could be expected in a time like this.
Yeah, and we know that the university received funds for like the CARES Act, but continuing to work as a tutor, as SI leader, meant continued employment for many of our students, who lost their jobs during this transition, or campus jobs were severely diminished. This question is for the both of you. How were you able to maintain your academic enrichment staff?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, one of my priorities was supporting my staff, and not just supporting them by giving them the tools to do their job, but supporting them as people and making sure that they even still had a job, right? And so part of the plan that I crafted was to ensure that they were still going to be receiving hours, because the majority of our staff are wage employees. And so on the tutoring end, we were going to continue to have one-on-one tutoring appointments using Zoom. So that piece didn't really change so much. They were still going to be meeting with students, meaning that they were still going to be eligible to receive pay. What I did tweak, however, on the tutoring end was, instead of compensating them solely for the time that was spent, which is how we normally compensate them, we compensated them for the entire hour. So if they spent 47 minutes helping a student, they were compensated for the whole hour. And this was a small thing, but it was still something that we were able to do, because by and large, our tutoring staff saw fewer appointments during this time, during the pandemic, because there were a lot of students who were either dropping classes or no longer needing tutoring assistance because they were planning on using the pass-fail option. There just weren't as many appointments coming in. On the supplemental instruction side, and actually I'll let Graham kind of discuss what we did on the supplemental instruction side for compensation. But another action that we took to ensure that our staff could still receive compensation, but also still provide value to our students, was we created an online tutoring event right before finals. So normally we have a program called Ready, Set, Prep, where we have our entire tutoring staff in the auditorium, in the MLK auditorium in Hale Hall, where students could just come on in, grab something to eat, stop, talk to a tutor, and get help before finals. Well, obviously we can't go in Hale Hall because we're all quarantined, right? And so I thought, what's something else that we can do? And so we created login tutoring, LIT, or LIT, if you will. And basically what that was we created Zoom channels for all of our tutoring and SI staff during the Saturday and Sunday right before finals, where ODI scholars could just log in and speak to someone that they need help with, if they need help with in a particular subject. So chemistry, for instance, from 1 to 5 o'clock. They can do math from 5 o'clock to 8 o'clock. They can go see a psychology advisor or a tutor, et cetera, et cetera. So we created an event that not only provided value to our ODI scholars who needed help before going into online finals for the first time, but we also created something that gave our staff an opportunity to earn some hours before the end of the year.
Nice, congratulations. Graham, do you want to talk about how you maintain tutor or instructor pay for SI?
Yeah, and so in order to do this, we have to understand how our SI leaders' weeks are structured, typically. So SI is a collaborative, is an embedded support model. Zay mentioned earlier that the SI leaders have taken the course before and know the material, but they also sit in on the class in real time. So they know on a week-by-week basis what the professor is covering, how they are covering it, so that they are much more attuned to what the students are hearing than potentially a tutor could be, who support a lot more courses, but aren't, refamiliarizing themselves in quite the same way that the SI leaders are. So that's one way. Another, that's about a third of their pay. Another third is planning. What do you intend to cover in your sessions? What's the most important material? What pedagogical strategies are you going to use in the sessions, and why will these strategies be beneficial for the students and this material? And then of course the sessions themselves. And so each of those represent a third of their pay typically. So when we made the virtual shift, we tried to keep that third structure. And so a third was, we need to see the notes that you take from engaging with the professor's material. You know, I don't know what your professor is doing. I don't know if they're providing, you know, just chapters, or I don't know if they're providing a Zoom recording like this, but we need to see that you have engaged with this material. And so show us the notes that you took from engaging with this material. So that's the first third. Another third was provide a video recording of some sort of you presenting and going over this material, so that students, again, can see it explained in a different way that may be more accessible than the professor was able to provide. So that's the second third. And then lastly, provide a worksheet and solution manual that the students can then take on their own and go through and work through it and see, really test their own knowledge of the material. And that was the final third. And so again, we were able to maintain the three-part compensation model, but we had to tweak a little bit what those three parts look like exactly.
Thank you. Thanks for that. This question is also for the both of you. What tutoring program and SI structures were most beneficial to you adjusting and sustaining program implementation during the national crisis?
I'll start off. Well, first I really have to give credit to The Ohio State University for having the technologies in place that enabled us on a whim's notice to be able to make adjustments. So things like Carmen Zoom, which, to be honest with you all, like I can probably count on one finger how many times I used Carmen Zoom before COVID-19. So having Carmen Zoom in place was major. Carmen and being able to have a course shell or a repository where we can store, and Box as well, Buckeye Box as well. Being able to have like online repositories that we can store like materials that students can then go to during their own free time and download, that was important as well. And so again, I do give credit to the university for having those technologies in place, and then also having the support on hand to assist us with questions and concerns as we were navigating these new technologies. I know I had a couple of questions, emails, times where I would have to call just to figure out what I was doing, and they were always really helpful. So that was beneficial. And then also just our approach as a unit, zeroing in on what's most important, what tools do we have to execute what's most important. Let's create a plan. It might not be perfect, but let's create a plan. Let's go with it, and let's communicate and communicate and communicate. Like I said, I reached out to students, Dr. Moore reached out to students, our tutors reached out to students, and we continued to send them announcements through Carmen and on our Twitter page and things like that. And so I think, one, just having the university, just having the structure for technological support on hand, and then two, I think the approach that we took as a unit was also really beneficial during this time. And there are a lot of learning moments from this, and we'll continue to get better as we learn how to navigate remote services. But I do think that we stepped up to the plate as best as we could.
And I just wanted to clarify that Carmen is pretty much our Blackboard, which is a more universal term. And then our box is more of our cloud storage space for Ohio State, correct?
Absolutely.
Graham, what about you? Were there things, infrastructures in place that helped you to make the transition for SI other than what Zaid mentioned?
Zaid covered a lot of it. I think what I really want to reiterate and emphasize is the foundations upon which our programs are based as well as the immense capacity of our student staff. We have just super capable students that work for us, and we leaned on them a whole awful lot because we knew that we had a staff that we could trust to get the job done at the end of the day. But to come back to the foundations of what we do as a unit, we are very cognizant of the fact that we're in the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, and that Ohio State was not built for most of our students, and that underpins most of the things that we do. And so we knew that unlike some other academic support units across campus that just didn't provide services, we knew that that was not an option for us. And so this certainty that our students could not stand to lose the services that we were providing was really most beneficial. We never lost sight of that. So as we're working, trying to scramble to find things to do, we knew that there was no other option. And so I think just the simple fact that we recognize where we are and who we're serving, that really helped us, in addition to our staff knows that as well.
And just to give our viewers a frame of reference, Zaid, how many tutors do you have on staff, and or how many classes do you provide tutoring for?
Absolutely. So we provide tutoring for over 40 subjects. We provide supplemental instruction for anywhere from 3 to 4 subjects. We had 4 in autumn and then 3 this past spring. And then as far as the number of staff members, we have 2 work study student staff members. We have 3 supplemental instruction staff members. And we had, at the end of spring, about 15 or 16 tutoring staff.
So a pretty large tutoring staff, considerably, right?
Yeah, over 20.
Do you know about how many hours of tutoring that you guys have completed this year so far?
Yeah, so, well, for the entire year, we're definitely down compared to the year before. A lot of that drop, understandably, happened during March and April when we moved to online services. But I will say that during the 1 month or so that the university was on lockdown and that, students couldn't attend in-person classes while we were providing remote services, we had 106 tutoring appointments scheduled. We had 34 students attend the login tutoring event that I talked about earlier. And then as far as downloading the study guides and the study videos that the supplemental instruction students prepared, we had over 200 previews and downloads of those.
Right.
So even though we had an overall drop in services, students were definitely still engaged and still using what we had during that 1 month. And that's something that we're really proud of. It's not so much that, it's not so much how many students, but most importantly, the fact that any student who needed help was able to get help. And that is the case. Any student who requested tutoring got tutoring. Any student that needed help with those SI courses got help.
You're absolutely correct. And there's still so many uncertainties about what the lasting effect of COVID-19 will be. Student support services and how students engage at university may look different. Well, we know they look different now than what they have in the past. Graham, can you discuss how you've worked with course instructors to maintain SI sessions, or what you're going to be doing next year?
What really worked to our favor this past semester and should continue into the autumn was inertia. Prior to every semester, we contact the instructors as well as their departments to let them know that they'll have one of our SI leaders attending their course, and to give those SI leaders access to the instructor's Carmen page, and thus all of that corresponding material. We then create an adjacent page for our ODI scholars who are enrolled in that course, and give the SI leader admin status of that page that they can then use to communicate with ODI scholars, independent of whether or not the ODI scholars are sitting in the specific section that the SI leader is sitting in on. Say, there are 10 different lectures for Chemistry 1210, and our SI leader is only sitting in one, but they have to support ODI scholars who may be sitting across all 10. Think of it in terms of a Venn diagram. And so there's the instructor and their course on Carmen, and then there's the ODI scholars group, and the SI leader is sort of the overlap there. And with that structure in place, we could make changes on board the ODI affiliated pages, while the SI leader still had access to and was engaging with their instructor's Carmen page and materials. And so that inertia, the fact that we already had that in place, meant that we could make decisions in real time, and again, trust to our SI leaders to just take the ball and run with it.
And then Zaid, my last question for you are, what strategies have you employed that are key to continued programmatic success during the widespread crisis? And what are you looking forward to do differently next year?
Yeah, so I think, and you're going to notice this is a theme with me. I think what we did that was key to our success was identifying what we do, identifying what we're here to do. So what are we here to do? What are the tools that we have at our disposal? Create a plan and communicate upwards, communicate downwards, communicate laterally, make sure that people are clear on what it is that we are doing now that things have changed. I think that was key to our success. And I think as we look forward to the future, granted the crisis was and is really still very challenging for all of us. There was still one positive that came out of it, and that's that we have created an infrastructure for providing online tutoring and online SI. And so I think looking ahead to the future, we are certainly looking at keeping online services as a permanent option. So, hopefully years down the road, when everything is back to normal, hopefully it won't take years down the road, but
right.
things are back to normal. Students will be able to choose between whether they want to have an in-person session or an online session. And it's kind of funny because Graham and I'd say maybe 2 or 3 weeks before the pandemic hit, we're discussing, what would it look like if we were to offer online services? That would be interesting. What are some of the things that we'd have to work through? And then we kind of tabled it as like, that's interesting. Let's think about it. Let's get to it. Well, COVID-19 had different plans for us, and we developed a plan. And so, that's something we hope to continue to offer. It provides the opportunity. It also, and I want to be clear, given the populations that we serve, right? So it increases our access. So you who maybe don't have the time or the transportation to come to Hale Hall all the time whenever they need tutoring. Well, now they can access tutoring from the comfort of their own home, and that's not going to be an issue. Yeah. Also, space constraints. So this helps to alleviate space constraints. If they're, if we can now have 20 or 30 tutoring appointments happening at the exact same time, because of the online platform. And so, granted, this whole situation was very challenging. It also created some opportunities for us, and that's something we hope to continue to tease out and improve for the future.
And then I heard you in one of your earlier answers mention your ODI Twitter account. You want to share what your Twitter handle is so that folks who are watching may be able to follow you on Twitter?
Absolutely. So our Twitter handle is ODI or OSU _ODI _TSSS. Okay. So OSU _ODI _TSSS. That's T, 3 S's. So that is our Twitter handle.
And if people want to follow up and have conversations directly with you, Zaid, how can they contact you?
You can contact me via email. So my email is abukar.3 I'm also on LinkedIn, so you can just search for my first and last name on LinkedIn. ZAYD, Zaid, Abukar, ABUKAR. I'm on LinkedIn. And then also, if you have inquiries specific to tutoring or anything related to our program, you can also email odi-tutor@osu.edu.
Great. And I know that you're dissertating this summer, Graham, so thank you for joining us. But if someone has a question about SI, how might they be able to contact you?
So I do not have a LinkedIn, which maybe I should get on that, but I'm sure
You
it'll be
need
fine.
to, man.
Man, we'll talk about that later. But until then, y'all can email me at knights.558@osu.edu.
Great. And that concludes all of our conversation for today. I really appreciate you for sharing just wonderful information. I think that the answers and your responses will give lots of our colleagues across campus and those who are doing and implementing programs across the country some insight as they're thinking about how they're going to adjust their tutoring program to meet the needs of their students moving forward. Thank you.
Absolutely. And thank you, Dr. Thomas. Appreciate it.
No
Yeah,
problem.
thanks for having us.
No problem.